sorry, and thank you for putting up with me. Have we introduced my esteemed panelists? Dr. Jyoti Bhaskar, Dr. Meenakshi, Dr. Raj, and I'm the moderator, and Dr.
Renu Chawla.
Renu Chawla. So all have been introduced. We start with the panel discussion on AUB. Dr. Raj, as we know,
come close to the screen. Come close to the screen, your face will be seen.
This is AUB in women within 20 to 40 years. 47-year-old woman experiencing heavy bleed last 3 months. She needs to change her pads every 5 to 6 times a day. There is no dysmenorrhea, no dyspareunia, no postpartum bleed, just mild vaginal discharge. She's gravida 3, para 2, tubal ligation done at age 31. On examination, breast, external genitalia are abnormal. Uterus is normal shape and size. So we go in for, she's subjected to an ultrasound. The ultrasound shows a thick polypoidal endometrium, which is 14 millimeter thick. She readily undergoes diagnostic hysteroscopy, which shows again a thick polypoidal endometrium. Curettage is done. Sampling is taken and set for histopathological examination. The endometrial biopsy report shows endometrial hyperplasia without atypia. Now, coming to the diagnosis becomes self-evident. It is AUBM, endometrial hyperplasia without atypia. So now the question for my panelists, what are the indications of EB? Would every patient who comes to you with menorrhagia should be subjected to an endometrial biopsy? And like this patient was subjected, or she readily agreed for a diagnostic hysteroscopy. So what is your take on a diagnostic hysteroscopy vis-a-vis saline infusion salpingography?
Okay, so Dr. Srinivas, can I take this question?
Yes, please. Most welcome.
So I think we've already had so many discussions. Dr. Ela has spoken very well. Dr. Vandana has highlighted this, that what are the indications? 47-year-old lady who has come to us with bleeding. She's straight away a candidate for undergoing an endometrial biopsy at the very first time that she comes. But before doing this biopsy, as you've already said, and as Madam said, that we would take this particular location to do a transvaginal ultrasound. Because this ultrasound not only helps us to know what the endometrial thickness is, but it also tends to rule out any other pathological findings like fibroids, any adenomyosis, any ovarian cysts that may be present, and also helps us to decide whether simple endometrial biopsy or we need to go for a hysteroscopy and an endometrial biopsy. Because if on an ultrasound we do get a polyp or an intracavitary lesion, then we would prefer to do a hysteroscopy along with a polypectomy, along with a case of biopsy. So for this patient, yes, any patient above 40 years, endometrial biopsy is indicated at the very first sitting. And we have already discussed in the lectures that less than 40 years, any patient who has a high risk for endometrial carcinoma, she's the one who should also undergo an endometrial biopsy. The second question is, what about diagnostic hysteroscopy? Yes, there are very clear indications when hysteroscopy has to be done. Not every patient has to be subjected for hysteroscopy and endometrial biopsy. The guidelines that Dr. Vandana had said very clearly says that if there's an intracavitary lesion, in case there's a discrepancy or dyssynchrony between the ultrasound findings, the histopath, and the symptoms, we need to do it. If the patient does not respond to our medical management, or if we have taken a biopsy, it's a thick endometrium, and we take a biopsy and we get inadequate tissue, such a patient would like to undergo an hysteroscopy. Now, as far as take on hysteroscopy versus SIS is concerned, yes, if there's an intracavitary lesion, then either of the two procedures can be done at the same time. Hysteroscopy gives us the advantage that we can do the polypectomy at the same particular sitting. With the SIS, yes, we can also do it at the sitting if the patient is under, we can have a suction cannula at that particular time and a polyp can be removed. But it's a matter of choice, it's a matter of experience, and it's a matter of what facilities are available with you that you would do either of the two procedures. Thank you.
Yeah, so very well said. Depends upon the indications of biopsy already highlighted by our previous two speakers. Above 40 and below 40, what are the indications? And as far as hysteroscopy versus SIS is concerned, it depends upon whether you're planning to do an operative procedure along with, and what is your own preferences and your choices and the facilities where you work. So now we have the treatment options, all of them. Out of this, I would, going through ma'am's slide on PPT is on slide share. Something which I really appreciate is the word reassurance. We need to tell the patient that it is not cancer, it is just hyperplasia. And as mentioned by previous speakers, that the hyperplasia conversion to malignancy takes about 20 years and the conversion rate is less than 5%. So once reassurance is given, that is enough to make her okay. Now, Dr. Jyoti Bhaskar, I think we'll continue with you. What would be your choice out of these options and for how long will you recommend them? And the second question will be, I'm sorry, how would you manage the reversal of symptoms, because we've diagnosed a hyperplasia without ATP on a biopsy. So it becomes a diagnosis based on a histopathological examination. So when would you advise a repeat biopsy and how would you carry on?
So as far as the first part it says is that what is your choice and how long? So the question is not only about my choice. It is a question about my discussion with the patient, giving her the choices that are available, and also make a combined decision along with the patient's choice. So among the whole list that you have given me, there are two options that I would take. It's LNG-IUS or we have the oral progesterone. I would like to tell the patient both the risks and benefits of both the particular procedures. And of course, my choice will be a part of it. And based on that, we make a decision. So I would go more in favor of an LNG-IUS. She's a 47-year-old lady. LNG-IUS is something that I'm going to be putting in for a period of 5 years. She's likely to go into menopause by the time it tends to finish. So there's no question of a recurrence and having the problem all over again. But LNG-IUS I would also do after a great counseling. If the patient is reluctant or she does not accept it, then my second choice would go on to oral progesterone, which has been very well highlighted by Dr. Ila. It's going to be a continuous therapy, minimum for 6 months, twice biopsy to be done at 6 months interval, and only when 2 times the biopsy is negative, only after that we're going to stop therapy. And in case she doesn't respond in 12 months of therapy, that's even with Mirena or with oral progestogens, then we are going to think about the next, and that is where we tend to offer them hysterectomy. So with the recurrence, with LNG-IUS is less, with oral progesterone it is much longer. It's much more than the recurrence. So personally, if you ask me, my choice is LNG-IUS, and I will take the patient's choice too into consideration.
So that was very well put. We need to do a biopsy after a period of 6 months, and 2 6-monthly biopsies have to come negative for us to take it easy. Robin, can we please have the audience poll question? The first question. Even all of you to please participate.
We'll just read out the question: how to use oral progesterone, cyclical, continuous,
or continuous.
Yes. So I hope all of you have submitted your answers.
Yes.
Do I take? Yes. So the answer is 73% have recommended that progesterones have to be used continuously and not cyclical. That is in the later half of the menstrual cycle, or as we say, in the luteal phase of the cycle. So it seems the carry home messages are very straight and wonderful. Now, so my slides have gone stuck again. If something is wrong with my laptop.
You just need to click once on the slide.
Yeah, so we've already gone through this Treatum algorithm. Dr. Vandana has already gone through that in detail. If you have a patient with hyperplasia, hysterectomy is a definitive answer. And if she is without hyperplasia, then the first choice, as Dr. Bhaskar has rightly said, LNG-IUS is the first recommended treatment, followed by oral progesterone, and that too in the we need to use it in the continuous manner. Now, this particular patient had an LNG-IUS inserted. Now, I come to my second case. A 37-year-old nulliparous woman presents to the OPD with complaints of heavy menstrual bleed in the last 2 years. Her PBAC score is 400. She is suffering from dysmenorrhea, dysphagia. On examination, uterus is palpable per abdomen, and on PV, it is 11 week size. It is very tender. Mobility is restricted. You can feel a nodularity in the PUD. Now, what is a PBAC score and what is the normal score? And maybe please have the viewers' question, please.
Can I take this?
Yes. We just answer this question, Dr. Meenakshi. What is PBAC score indicated in HMB? Is it less than 150 or more than 150? I hope all have answered. So we'll have the answer with us soon. Meanwhile, Dr. Meenakshi can always answer this question. What is PBAC score?
PBAC is basically pictorial bleeding assessment score, where we assess the bleeding depending on the amount of pads or the tampon she is using or the amount of clot she is passing. So based on that, 1 point is given for a slightly stained pad or a tampon. 5 points is given for each moderately stained pad or a tampon, and 20 points for each completely saturated pad, or 10 points for completely saturated tampon is given. If she passes a small clot, then a 1 point score is given. And for passing of large clot, a score of 5 is given. And whenever there is an episode of flooding where she stains the underwear beyond the pad, then a 5 point is given. We add up all the score, and usually up to the score of 150 is considered a normal blood loss, which corresponds to 80 ml. And if a score is more than 150, it suggests a heavy menstrual bleeding. And PBAC score is a very good system to assess the severity of the bleeding, as well as to assess for the response to the therapy. So it can be used to monitor the therapy, the treatment plan for the patient.
So that was a very wonderfully explained what is PBAC scoring system, and the audience gets full mark. We have 71% people who have given a score of more than 150 will be labeled as a heavy menstrual bleed. So coming to the next question. My laptop has decided to trouble me today.
Click on your slide. Click on your slide.
So the differential, this patient was subjected to an ultrasound, and ultrasound showed us that there was a big size uterus, 11 into 10. There was altered ecostructure. And of course, we know the various signs indicating adenomyosis as myometrial hyperplasia, a blurred endomyometrial junction. The diagnosis came as adenomyosis along with anemia. Now, as per the Palm Coin classification, it is AUBA. She was evaluated for CBC, TSH, and MRI was also conducted. The reason being history of dyschezia, dysmenorrhea, and on PV, it was a tender uterus with restricted mobility. Now, how will you treat her? Keeping in mind that she's a nullipara. And what is the incidence of pregnancy in a patient with adenomyosis? We'll be covering up one of the questions asked by the audience as to ART in adenomyosis. And what is your take on role of adenomyomectomy? Dr. Meenakshi, you're a fantastic laparoscopic surgeon. And also a short note on HIFU, MRI, though Dr. Vandana has already highlighted, but just a brief is always welcome. So we start with the first question. How will you treat her, keeping in mind that she's a nullipara?
Obviously, adenomyosis patients for a typical patient of a 40-year-old with multiparas patients presenting with heavy menstrual bleeding and with dysmenorrhea, but classically a presentation of a patient with adenomyosis. But now increasingly patients who are nulliparas or with infertility are found to be having adenomyosis. And now the patient, this patient, she is 37-year-old, she's nulliparous, she desires to preserve the fertility. We need to ask whether she is intend to conceive just now, or she wants to intend to conceive a little later, like 1 year or so. If she plans to conceive after a year, then the LNG IUS will be the best option for her. That will control her bleeding. It will decrease the size of adenomyosis, and will lead, then when she plans to conceive, then the LNG IUS can be removed. And once the patient is not willing for an LNG IUS, then the second option will be to go for a GnRH analog in this patient. And where along with an add-back therapy, if we are planning to give the therapy for more than 6 months, then estrogen, progesterone should be added. And usually we need to add the estradiol valerate along with the natural micronized progesterone, 100 microgram daily in a continuous combined fashion along with JNRH, so that we can use it for long term. But when this patient plans to conceive, then we need to JNRH needs to be stopped and switched over to an ovulation induction therapy. We need to discuss with the patient regarding the surgical modality, as this is available, especially the patients who are infertile. They have a very poor chances of conception with adenomyosis. Even if they conceive, there's a higher chances of miscarriage in such patients. Like in patients who are undergoing ART, prevalence of adenomyosis was seen in almost 20 to 25% of the patients. And in ART cycles, it has been well documented that people with adenomyosis have almost 50% reduced chance of pregnancy as compared to the patients who do not suffer from adenomyosis. So surgical modality of adenomyosis is definitely a treatment for patients who present with adenomyosis and infertility, but we have to select our patients well. Not all patients are a candidate for adenomyomectomy. Patients who have a single large adenomyoma or who have a uterus size which is more than 12 weeks of pregnancy, or patients who have an adenomyoma which is larger than 5 centimeters will most likely will benefit from adenomyomectomy. Adenomyomectomy surgeries are basically two types. One is basically just for focal adenomyosis. It's a focal adenomyomectomy which can be done laparoscopically as well as open method. For diffuse adenomyosis, it's a big challenge. There can be a cytoreductive surgeries where a partial reduction of the adenomyotic lesion is done by a V-shaped wedge resection or a H-shaped incision technique. Where a complete adenomyomectomy reduction method has also been advocated, where the triple flap method is being used, as well as a asymmetric dissection method has been used. The classical key points, if we are going to take a patient for surgery for adenomyosis, we should always keep in mind that a focal adenomyomectomy can be done by laparoscopically much better, but in diffuse, open surgery have an advantage that we can palpate and remove the hard adenomyotic lesions better. And also we should use less and less electrocautery surgeries during the adenomyomectomy resection, as when electrocautery uses has been associated with a weak scar, and there is an increased risk of scar rupture. Silent uterine rupture has found to be more common following adenomyomectomy as compared to myomectomy. It has been seen in one study that uterine ruptures, especially the silent rupture in the midterm, was almost 4 times more common following adenomyomectomy when compared to myomectomy, and almost 6 times more common following VBAC. So we need to be very careful about adenomyomectomy surgery, and while we are suturing, it has to be a meticulous suturing. And where there is an overlapping method or we are using a myometrial flap technique are definitely better rather than a simple suturing. And serosal surface should not be exposed. We should be using either a baseball technique of suturing so that less of the raw surface is exposed and there is decreased risk of bowel adhesions.
So that was wonderful. And now we know whom to call when we are planning a surgery in a patient with adenomyosis. Dr. Jyoti?
Thank you, ma'am. I want to say about the post-operative pregnancy outcome, which we must counsel the patient before we take up this patient for adenomyomectomy. As the clinical pregnancy rate after adenomyomectomy has found to be variable from 17% to 72%, and uterine rupture has found to be seen in almost 6%, and most of the cases it was a silent rupture in the mid-trimester. And we need to counsel this patient. There is a higher risk of miscarriage even after adenomyomectomy surgery. So patients have to be really counseled well before when we take the patients for adenomyomectomy surgery.
So that is wonderful. Dr. Jyoti, just a few lines on patient who seek ART counseling with adenomyosis. Will use of GnRH, I believe the long protocol does help?
Yeah, definitely.
Dr. Jyoti?
Yeah. If these particular patients are looking for a pregnancy, then GnRH analogs will definitely work, because as you said, she also has dysphagia, she has got other problems. So there may be, apart from adenomyosis, there may be an element of endometriosis also. So these analogs will bring about the whole system low. And once it has taken for 3 months or maybe 1 day, and then we can straight away take her for an ultra-long protocol. And that will definitely help us in these patients.
Yes. So I hope one of the our colleagues from the audience had this question. It has been answered. And just a short word on use of NSAIDs when you're just giving her a symptomatic treatment does help. So we have NSAIDs along with the antispasmodic as a first line treatment when it is just the symptomatic relief which is seeking. So we've already had discussed about GnRH agonist and also the add-back therapy. The treatment algorithm, we've already gone through it multiple times.
Dr. Jyoti, I want to know, you're counseling a patient like this who has got a 12 weeks uterus and the uterus is up and, her uterosacral ligaments are all riddled up with things. We should be very conscious as far as pregnancy rates are concerned. You must not tip them up towards a surgery. They themselves should decide कि भाई हमारे उन्होंने कराया उनको फायदा उन्होंने कराया उनको फायदा हुआ. अपनी तरफ से आप सर्जरी ऑफर करने की बहुत ज्यादा कोशिश नहीं करिए. Because once the surgery is given, she is going to follow up. I think ये अल्लाह ही मालिक है. Nobody can predict क्या pregnancy होएगी कि नहीं होएगी इस adenomyosis के patient. And she is already 37. उसके अपने तो अंडे हैं नहीं. उसके अपने तो अंडे हैं नहीं. जो भी कुछ साइकिल होगी वो तो उसको डोनर साइकिल से ही होगा उसका काम. So I think, in a 37-year-old lady, subjecting her for surgery, you have to be very, very cautious. These days, litigations are far too many, and I think one has to be very careful.
And even if the patients who conceive with adenomyosis, even after surgery, they
Poor
have a very
prognosis.
high miscarriage rate, along with a uterine rupture. So it has to be offered only as a last resort when the patient insists.
One thing.
Yes.
The only thing I just wanted to add, we were talking about the CBAC score in this particular one.
Yes.
So the NICE guidelines have somewhat said that it is not so important about the amount of bleeding that you're going to go. Any amount of bleeding which tends to affect a woman's life socially, economically, practically, physically, it should be considered as a heavy menstrual bleeding. So over here, if any woman who comes and says that it is affecting my life, we should be caring about, and not so much emphasis on how many pads, how much clot. No, this is less, not that is more. That they have taken off the emphasis on that.
That I think is a more progressive approach towards diagnosing HMB. And so we've already gone through this algorithm. This patient she requested for insertion of LNG IUS. Now we switch over to AUB in adolescence. I have my first case, a 13-year-old girl. She is brought to the emergency because of continuous bleeding for the last 22 days. She attained her menarche 9 months ago. And her mother says that she has a history of Fanconi's anemia. She's under the treatment of a hematologist. She's made our work very easy. On examinations, she is pale, malnourished, soft abdomen. Hemoglobin is 6 grams. Ultrasound is normal. Now, before we move forward on this particular case, it was a collective decision to put up this particular case because these patients with coagulopathies, they first approach a gynecologist with menorrhagia. And this is the time when we need to know that we have to involve a hematologist, and in fact, after a while, transfer such patients to hematologists. But nevertheless, since they come to us for the first time, here it is easy, this particular case, but many times we are the ones who are going to make a diagnosis of coagulopathy. So we should know what tests are to be offered, what is the history, which indicates or which kind of pushes us towards us to think about coagulopathy. So what are the questions you were asked on history? What will be the tests you suggest? And at least what is the first aid you would know? So keeping that in mind, that of course, eventually we'll be transferring this case to a hematologist. We are proceeding with this case. So since her mother has already told us that she suffers from Fanconi's anemia, and the patient is subjected these tests, the diagnosis of AUBC is made. Now, what is Fanconi's anemia? How will you evaluate her? What are the tests you will advise for coagulopathy till the time you're calling up your hematologist colleague?
Fanconi's anemia is
one of my panelists. Yes.
Fanconi's anemia is a rare anemia. It is the most common form of an inherited aplastic anemia. It is a single gene disorder which is with a autosomal recessive inheritance. Single gene disorder with autosomal recessive inheritance. It causes bone marrow failures. That is because of the genetic defect in DNA repair mechanism, which in turn results in decrease in number of RBCs, which in turn causes anemia, decrease in the WBCs, which results in increased infections, decreased platelets, which also causes increase in the bleeding. Usually it is detected at the ages between 3 to 14 years. These children normally fail to thrive, and it is detected, then it has treated accordingly. And the lifespan of these children is very less. They normally survive between 20 to 30 years. And the average age of survival is 18 years, because these children die early because of the morbidities associated along with the anemia. They also have many other abnormalities, like abnormalities of the kidney, abnormalities of the heart. They are more prone for cancers, like cancers of the head, neck, and urogenital system. And these patients, once they are diagnosed with these, the hematologist and the geneticist should be involved for their treatment.
So how will you evaluate her, Dr. Renu? What will be the test you will advise for coagulopathy?
We need to take a detailed history of her, detailed menstrual history, as well as the family history is to be taken. Family history is important because this is an autosomal recessive disorder, so we need to know if any other member of the family is also affected. Plus, we need to take the history for coagulopathies, like if anybody has a history of excessive bleeding during periods, or anybody has suffered PPH or any other abnormal bleeding episodes. Plus, if she has had a treatment for severe anemia earlier in the childhood before this episode, or maybe she was hospitalized for this anemia. Now, if we need to investigate her, we need to investigate her for coagulopathies as well as for her Fanconi's anemia part. So, first of all, the investigation to be done are ABO and RH, complete blood count. Urine for pregnancy test is to be done in all adolescents unless otherwise. Then PT-INR, APTT, LFT, KFT, thyroid stimulating hormone, 1 Willebrand factor, factor 8, and bone marrow biopsy for this patient. But if we have to do bone marrow biopsy and coagulation profile, then we have to take help of the hematologist also. Because under their guidance, if we do these investigations, it is better to treat such patients. And because of the Fanconi syndrome, this patient should also undergo CT scan of the head, and also hearing test and ocular examination should also be done, so as to know that other associated abnormalities which are found in Fanconi anemia, whether this child is having that or not. Because those all issues are to be taken care of along with the treatment of this episode of bleeding.
Good. So we are talking about a patient of Fanconi's anemia. Otherwise, a patient who comes to a young girl comes with bleeding, and we see that she is hemodynamically stable, whether she needs a blood transfusion. It is very important that we rule out pregnancy, because in this particular case, it was easy. The mother told us that she has Fanconi's. Not every time it is made easy for us. In those cases, please do rule out pregnancy. Blood test, of course, she has already mentioned, Dr. Renu. Then an ultrasound is carried out. And now, what will be your management goals, Dr. Renu?
For a case of AUBO, the first line of treatment is non-hormonal. These patients should be put on tranexamic acid, 1 gram QID for 5 days. And if the bleeding does not stop, then in some cases, we may need to use desmopressin. Desmopressin is a synthetic analog of vasopressin, which is available in many various forms, like it can be given orally, intranasally, or in the injectable form. So we can take care, we can use desmopressin to arrest the acute bout of bleeding. So hormonal treatment for these patients can be given. We have to take care that we can give hormonal treatment, but injectables should be prevented. We should not use injections, as there is always a tendency for more bleeding. So oral contraceptive pills, combined oral contraceptive pills, we should use. And in the dosages, suppose the bleeding is mild, then it can be taken care of by the tranexamic acid. If bleeding is severe or moderate, then oral contraceptives should be used. Combined oral contraceptive pills should be used. In the dosages for moderate bleeding, it should be given in the dosages of 1 tablet 3 times a day till the bleeding stops. Usually the bleeding stops within 48 hours. So once the bleeding stops, then we should reduce the dosage to 1 tablet twice a day, and then 1 tablet twice a day for 5 days, and then rest of the days till 21 days one should use 1 tablet once a day. Suppose when we have reduced the dose to one tablet a day and the bleeding recurs, then the rest of the days it should be given twice a day only. Otherwise, if the patient has come with a severe bout of bleeding, then we should use the tablets like COCs, 1 tablet QID till the bleeding stops, and then 1 tablet TDS for 3 days, and rest of the days for another 2 weeks, 1 tablet twice a day. Normally the bleeding stops with this higher dose of estrogen, but the side effect is that with large dose of estrogen, patient develops vomiting. So we have to take care of, we have to be sure that the patient is taking all the tablets. We have to give them antiemetics, and we have to counsel them for taking such high dosages so as to control the bleeding.
Robin, may we have the third question for the viewers' opinion poll? Long back, while we were during our good days when we were meeting at Wood Apple, I was preparing a slide. I had approached Dr. Sharda ma'am regarding a DEXA scan, and she had said, Deepti, जब टेस्ट एडवाइस करती हो तो उसको इन्फर करना भी जानती हो या नहीं? Keeping that in mind, I'm just
sorry, I lost.
So this is the question which came into my mind. How long? No, this is not the question. Next question, Nalo, Robin, put the next question, please. So that dictum I have kept in my life, that till the time I'm aware of why I am suggesting this particular test. So what does Dr. Renu mentioned about INR, APTT, and the von Willebrand factors, which incidentally I should tell my friends that the cost is only 19,000 for the, yes. So now what does a high INR mean? आपने टेस्ट एडवाइस कर दिया, बट शारदा मैम आपसे पूछेंगी कि इसको इन्फर कैसे करोगी दीप्ति, नॉर्मल कितना है और हाई आने से क्या मतलब होता है, और उसका वैल्यू अगर कम आती तो उसका क्या मतलब होता है. So INR means blood will clot slowly or will it clot quickly? So let's wait for the, what does the audience have to say on this particular question?
93% all right.
Robin, dijiyega answer?
Ma'am, I shared the result already.
Yeah.
And the result is on the screen.
Yeah. So higher INR means that the blood will clot slowly. I am so happy that the 93% have people have actually given the right answer. So Sharda ma'am, you should be happy.
Yes, I am.
Thank you so much. So, thanks to you. I've always maintained that. Now we've gone through all these questions. My slides today have really troubled me a lot.
Again, click on the slide and then.
Yeah. So we've gone through this algorithm, AUBC with coagulopathy. Dr. Renu, while we go through this algorithm, now this is a Fanconi syndrome where you said the lifespan is very short. They do not live beyond, say, 20 or maybe with good care beyond 25. So what about your take on these kind of patients with coagulopathy who plan to plan a pregnancy?
So normally these patients should be counseled properly. Even the parents should be told that if she becomes pregnant, she may land up in many problems, especially this kind of a patient who has pancytopenia. So if she becomes pregnant, all through the pregnancy, she needs expert care of hematologist, gynecologist, as well as a geneticist. Because this being the autosomal recessive disorder, this may be transmitted to the baby also. So if she becomes pregnant, she has to know that she has to undergo either chorion villus biopsy or amniocentesis to know whether whatever baby she's carrying is also not a Fanconi baby, Fanconi syndrome baby.
Yeah. So different. So again, we need to know that there are times in our professional lives when we need to seek the help or involvement of our colleagues and friends in other departments too. When it comes to AUBC, yes, we need to consult a hematologist, and in pregnancy, please consult a geneticist also. Now, in this particular case, the answer was, after counseling the parents, LNG IUS was inserted. Dr. Renu or any one of my panelists would like to make a point on this particular statement, that a young 13-year-old girl is advised LNG IUS insertion. Dr. Raj, Dr. Renu?
I could not hear because wo mera disconnect ho gaya tha. Please repeat the question.
Yeah, so this patient, after counseling, LNG IUS was inserted. The parents were counseled and they were taken into consideration. All the pros and cons were shared, and then LNG IUS was inserted. What will be your take on this statement? Would you think is correct choice? Would we do the same?
Because that will lead to a control of her periods, and
yes,
it will also help us in building up her hemoglobin.
Yes.
Because she has come with 6.5 grams hemoglobin, initial treatment would be blood transfusion, followed by giving Hematinics for a longer time so that her hemoglobin is maintained. Plus, we have to take care that she does not bleed again. So LNG IUS is the best option because she has to visit to so many people. So if her bleeding problem is taken care of, at least she can concentrate on going to the hematologist or the other people which she requires for her further problems, other associated problems.
Yes, and so she be provided with a good. Okay, so now coming to the last question. This is again a 13-year-old girl who comes to the emergency with heavy bleeding the last 3 weeks. And she says that her menses have been irregular and prolonged since menarche, which happened 2 years back. On examination, there is nothing which will provide us with a clue. No, and family members, everyone have been examined and asked in questions. There's nothing to indicate the hematological disorder. Physical examination, we will not go into detail. This particular slide had mentioned about the TANUS in staging, but we are going to skip that. Body weight, height, everything is within normal limits. No evidence of bruising, petechiae, rash, except for a heart rate of 85 and bleeding. All the physical and examinations. In this particular case, because she's a young girl, so we PR is generally recommended, which revealed no abnormality. So now this is, of course, again the palm coin. We are deleting. She doesn't have a polyp, no leiomyoma, no hyperplasia, no coagulopathy. Detailed questioning has already been done, no iatrogenic. So in this particular case, on transrectal examination, the endometrial thickness was 10 mm. Otherwise, the uterus and ovaries were normal. The diagnosis in this case is AUBO. Robin, maybe have the next, the last opinion poll question. Robin?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So how long to wait post-menarche for the irregular periods to be diagnosed as due to PCOD and not because of an immature HPO axis? So we already have the answer. Nevertheless, let's wait for the, what was the poll answer?
Tahir, please show the answer.
So there is still a confusion in the minds of our friends. 43% have said that it should be more than 5 years, and 57 have said less than 5 years, which is almost the same. So Dr. Raj should be making it clear to us. Dr. Sharda ma'am, would you please just highlight this point? How long do we wait post-menarche to label a patient of irregular periods as having PCOD?
Yeah, I think if the cutoff is 5 years, one can say 5 years, but it is said, in the first 5 years also one can diagnose also. It all depends upon if patient has an amenorrhea for 90 days, and if the cycle is more than 35 days, we can definitely take it. It can be PCOD. I'm confused as far as 5 years and less than 5 years and more than 5 years is concerned.
Choice should be 5 years and less than 5 years.
Less than. Dr. Raj, आप बताएं. Dr. Raj, आप अपने आप को unmute करेंगे?
आप बताओ क्या less than 5 years है?
जी मैम, less than 5 years है.
Less than 5 years.
Because see, along with that, to diagnose the PCOD, there should be the other features of the PCOD. Suppose it's not the duration of the year after the menarche to diagnose the PCOD. Initially, the PCOD is diagnosed as the multicystic ovary. If you see, can you hear me?
Yes.
So I don't think it is the criteria cutoff of 5 years, below 5 years and above 5 years.
I am also confused because it is very clearly said in 2018 guidelines that in case if the amenorrhea has been any time 90 days, then patient is categorized in PCOD. Or if the cycle is less than 21 days or more than 35 days, the first 2 years, and then something like 35 years. I will give you the exact thing which as far as the menstrual part, but it is less than 5 years.
Now, the treatment option for this particular patients can be already seeing on the screen. Ma'am, please summarize the evaluation of this case. What would you prefer in this girl, OCs or just progestins? What about your concerns regarding use of estrogen in a young girl? And in case you are prescribing OCs, would you be particular about the dose of estrogen in the combined oral contraceptive pill and how long? So we start with the first question. Please summarize the evaluation of
regarding the evaluation, this patient is post-menarche 2 years and with the history of the menstrual irregularity of delayed prolonged periods. And the other specific is there is no family history. Her pubertal physical growth is absolutely okay. She has reached to the puberty well in time. And there is no history of bleeding disorders, not even the family history. Her BMI is okay. So according to the AUB classification, she is in the ovulatory dysfunction, and this is what it is required. The patient, we have to counsel the patient, and this is a immaturity of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, ovarian axis, which usually resolves within 2 to 3 years after the menarche. So this is the most important. Her ultrasound also doesn't show any typical structural defect. So now the preparation of the OCs or the progestin, out of the two, now I have gone through the literature, there is no clear-cut consensus which it should be the preferred. Now, if she has come in the bleeding episode, the oral contraceptive in the high dose to start with followed by the tapering dose, at least minimum continuously for 21 days after the bleeding is controlled, is the preferred for the first cycle, followed by the progestin for next 3 to 6 months to regularize and cyclically her menstruation to be maintained. Now, about the fear and concern about the use of estrogen. Now, in this young girl who has completed her pubertal physical growth, there is no worry about the use of estrogen because of the epiphyseal closure will be there. It will affect on the epiphyseal closure. So this estrogen and the hormonal therapy is not going to affect because she has already reached. Her BMI is 19, her height is okay, all the pubertal growth, M, P, and A, all are appropriate according to her age. So I don't think there is any worry or concern about the use of estrogen. Second thing is the specific dose of estrogen nowadays, it's only the lowest dose, which is the 30 microgram. But because in the bleeding episode, we have to give it 3 or 4 times for 3-4 days initially. which will again result into the nausea and vomiting. So in spite of the 50, I think 30 microgram dose is the best dose appropriate for this case. And the treatment has to continue minimum for 3 to 6 months. Then up to the 6 months is sufficient. Then we have to reevaluate the case, especially if there is a persistence of anovulation after the stoppage of treatment, or there is in between, we can evaluate her early if there is no response to the treatment. The second thing, once the progestin, she can be given cyclically for next 3 to 6 months again. And the patient has to be reassured and counseled, especially for the follow-up, because the anovulation can return, and especially the PCOD in the young girls are more prone.
That was wonderful. Any of my panelists would like to give their opinion regarding whether they would prefer OCs or progestin? As ma'am has said that she would like to go for an OC in an acute phase, and after cycle regulation has been achieved, would switch over to progestin. Treatment given can be varying from 3 to 6 months, and then break the treatment, assess the patient. Many of them just improve on their own. If not, then again, she would resort to progestin. Dr. Meenakshi, what will be your choice?
One thing, Dr. Dipti, she has to, the counseling and reassurance plays a very important role, because the parents has to be understanding that this is the immaturity of the hypothalamic pituitary axis, ovarian axis, and once they mature, the periods are going to be corrected and regular by itself. So they don't need any assurance, but they should be again counseled that she should not put on weight, she should be having de-stress, and the dietary to complete and recover or correct her anemia. She should be supplemented with the iron therapy also.
Yes. Any difference of opinion or any comment, Dr. Vandana, Dr. Ila? Dr. Bhaskar, would you like to make a comment?
I would just like to say, yes, estrogen is the drug that we have to be using in these patients. And we have to overcome the fear that she's not going to gain any more height, because that already has been a thing. So we need to change our practice from progesterones to estrogen-based therapies, and it's the low-dose estrogens which work really well with these patients. 6 months we stop, they normally correct themselves, and we would not need to start them all over again.
Yes.
I also agree with that the combined oral contraceptive pills with 30 microgram estrogen gives a very good cycle control. With progesterone, many times patients...
Only thing which I in acute phase.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. In acute phase, yes. So, we've already gone through this slide.
Can I ask one question from ma'am?
Yes.
Ma'am, have you ever used Premarin in IV as an IV therapy to control the acute hemorrhagic episode?
I have never used it.
In my practice, I have
never used. But in such a patient, people, I use Novolon 1BD and give them antiemetic. And I do counsel them that Novolon 1BD is also going to be, will give her a lot of nausea. But I find it's very, very effective.
Novolon is the ideal drug, is a combined doses to be started in these young girls, because it contains both desogestrel and in the lowest dose. And the effect is, it's very effective in controlling the bleeding, and we can increase the dose if the bleeding is not controlled. But anyone has ever used the IV Premarin or the estrogen therapy?
Oh, no.
No, we have not used.
Not me, ma'am.
Is it available in India?
Yes.
I can find.
By Dr. Sonia Malik, it is available, but we have never used.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am.
So this particular patient was put on cyclical norethistron for 3 months, and subsequently she started having irregular periods. So this diagnostic algorithm, we've gone through multiple times. It's made our diagnosis and treatment and management very simple. With that, I thank all of you for putting up with me, and I'm so sorry about for all making you all wait, but I hope It was interesting.
It was a wonderful presentation and covering the all aspect of AUB from menarche till the menopause age group.
Yes.
Well done, Dipti.
Make the presentation online things 1 hour only, not stretching to
2 hours.
2 hours 15 minutes.
Ma'am, iske baad ke jo presentations, we've kept only one speaker for the day.
Yes, it should be 1 hour, that's it.
Yes, ma'am. So we've kept only one speaker now. Hence all.
None of us are going for MD examination, so I think good enough.
That's true, ma'am. 2 hours is too much.
2 hours. Absolutely.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much,
Well
ma'am.
done.
Thank you.